Hi guys, it's Sandy with Sandy Cogdill Designs, and it's been a while since I've done a video, so happy almost New Year's. Today I have a card that I made using Hello Bluebird's Merry Mail stamp set, and I wanted to take a little bit of a break from Christmas stuff, although I still will probably play around with a little bit more Christmas themed items, but this card I wanted to do more of a Valentine's Day card. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos. You can also follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill Designs or on my blog www.sandycogdilldesigns.com. All right, let's get started. I'm going to start out with a piece of Hammermill Premium Color copy cover in my MISTI. I generally prefer to use explicit blending card for Copic coloring, but because I am doing some ink blending on this, I actually prefer the Hammermill. So this is a 100-pound weight. Anyway, I'm going to get it put in my MISTI, and I'm going to lay my die down. And the die is a Lawn Fawn. It's one of their newer dies that just came out. It's the Postage rectangle stackables, and it's the second from the largest. I'm going to lay that in my MISTI. I'm going to figure out where I want my little fox and my little mailbox, and I'm going to get my fox stamped first. I am using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I've got her stamped out now, and I've also stamped out a mask on some Eclipse masking paper. I'll go ahead and get her covered up and start to figure out exactly where I want that little mailbox to go. I'm going to lay my die back in my MISTI just to use as a guideline to help me line up the mailbox. There's a really cute little stitched line on the outside. Well, it's kind of the inside edge of the die, but I want to make sure that my image is falling right inside that line, because when I go to put the background inking on, I'm going to be using a stencil that lines up perfectly with that little perforated mark. I'll go ahead and get that inked up and stamped, and then we'll move on to inking the background. Before I do any inking, I want to make sure that I cover up that little mailbox with the masking piece of paper that I've already stamped and cut out. Next, I'm going to place my die exactly where I want my image to fall within that little dotted line on the die, and then I'm going to run it through my die cutter. Okay, I'm going to adhere my little postage stamp scene to my glass surface using some temporary adhesive. There is a stencil that can be purchased along with the Postage rectangle stackables from Lawn Fawn, and I believe there's either 3 or 4 different stencils, but there's a stencil for each different size of die. And they're actually really great because they have a kind of embossed line where you can line up that stencil perfectly with your die cut image, and it is going to mask off that outside edge so that you really do have kind of that white edged stamp look. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use some mint tape to tape around the outside edges. And then I'm also going to use a little piece of mint tape to kind of mask off where I want the ground to be on this little scene that I'm creating. My glass mat is magnetic, and I could use some of the magnetic little bars that they sell, but for me they seem to get in the way. So they're not as helpful as I was hoping they would be, but I do use them for different techniques occasionally. Okay, now I'm going to start ink blending that background, I'm going to be using 3 colors of Distress Oxide inks. I'm going to be using Spun Sugar for my lightest coat, or lightest color. The next color I'll be moving into is Kitsch Flamingo, and then I will finish up with Picked Raspberry. The brush I'm using is actually called a Blending Buddy. I get them from Trinity Stamps, and I have found that I really like them. They help with hand fatigue if you're doing a lot of ink blending. Plus, I'm able to really control the amount of pressure I'm putting on the paper to help me kind of control the amount of ink that I'm putting down. Now that I've got my upper background done, I want to go ahead and move on to my little ground surface. I'm going to peel up that piece of mint tape, and then I'm just using an edge of another stencil just as my mask because my tape wasn't going to stick down on the wet ink. So I'm using Shabby Shutters Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm going to go back in with one of my smaller brushes, and I'm going to add in a little bit of Rustic Wilderness just to give it a couple of different colors. Since my background is kind of a hot pink, and this is a Valentine's Day card, I decided to use a stencil. It's called Falling Hearts. Again, it's from Fawn. And I'm going to use a white pigment ink, and I'm just going to kind of play around where I want that stencil to be, and I'm going to just lightly tap in some ink just to have those little hearts falling in the sky. And then just for a little bit of glitz, I'm going to splatter on some Spellbinders splatter effects in Sparkle just to add a little bit of bling to this background. And now for the big reveal. This is my favorite part of masking. Once my splatter effects is dry, I'll go ahead and carefully remove my masks. I will definitely be saving those, though, to use on another card. They're usually pretty good for 2 or 3 uses as long as you don't overly saturate that paper with ink. And now we are ready to start our coloring. I am using Copic markers. The way I do coloring is different than a lot of other videos. You see a lot of other people start with the outside or the darkest color first, and I just really struggle doing that. So I pretty much lay my lightest color in first, just because I feel like it wets my paper and it helps me with my blending. So I'll go ahead, lay in my lightest color first, and then work from lightest to darkest. So for this particular little fox, for the little part of the face that's a light color, the tip of the tail, the inside of the ear, and a teeny bit around her eye, I will be using YR30 and E30. Then for the fur part, I will start with YR23, which is my lightest color, move into YR24, and then YR27. For the inside of the ear, I will be using R20 and R22, and I kind of do a little bit of tip to tip just to soften up that 22 a little bit so it's not real harsh in that inner ear. Next, we're going to do her little coat, and I wanted to keep all of my colors kind of conversation heart colors, so I'm using a kind of a lavenderish color. I'm using BV 000, BV 00, and BV 11. And again, I'm laying in my lightest color, and then I'm coming back with my mid color and my darker color to add the additional shading. And for the scarf, using the same technique of working from light to darker, I used YR0 or 000, YR01, and YR02. And I'm just going to color in the little scarf and the boots. And now for the mailbox. So I am using the neutral gray. So I'm using N0, N1, N2, and N3. And again, same technique, light to dark. And then I just kind of go back and forth and add additional shading as I think it needs it. Initially, when I did the coloring of this card, I had wanted her little letter and the little opening, the slot in the mailbox to be pink. And for some reason, it just wasn't adding anything to the card. It just kind of blended in. So I do go back and after everything's colored, and I do the mail slot in the top of that mailbox with, I believe it's R27, just to make that opening pop a little bit. The little Valentine that she's putting in the mailbox, I forgot to say when we were first inking it that once I had inked that little fox, I went in with my chamois and I removed the little wording that was on the little letter. I wanted it not to be Christmas, and I eventually will stamp in just a small heart to kind of help give it that Valentine feel, if that makes any sense at all. Anyway, the mailbox is all of those grays. And as soon as we're done with that, we'll just add a little bit of shading into the ground and we will start putting our card together. I've got a couple pieces of pattern paper cut out. My largest size is 5.5 by 4.25. The next size down is 5.25 by 4. I'm going to go ahead and glue those together. The sentiment is from the stamp set, which I love, so I just stamped that out on some white cardstock and trimmed it off. And then as I was putting it together, I realized that that one bottom corner seemed a little bit naked. So I went to my stash and I went to Sweet November has some really cute postmarks. So I pulled out that stamp set. It's called Year-Round Postmarks. And again, it's from Sweet November. And I stamped out the February postmark. And then I just did a little bit of ink blending just to soften up those edges and make it so it wasn't quite as harsh. It would have been really cute if I had heat embossed it with some red embossing powder. But I was running out of time and my embossing skills are hit and miss on a good day. So I just went ahead with the stamping and ink blending. I did decide to pop up my little sentiment banner and my little postmark, and I believe I'm using pop dots that are 2 millimeters thick. And then to finish up my card, I'm going to use some of Trinity stamps. I believe they're called jellyfish confetti dots. And I'm just going to add a little bit of sparkle to that upper right-hand corner and the lower left-hand corner. I always feel like Valentine's Day cards always need just a little bit extra of the glitter. And that pretty much wraps up this card front. I will go ahead and at some point attach it to a card base. I'm kind of really bad about doing that, so I have tons of card fronts that just need to get finished up. All right. That pretty much does it for this card. I love the way it turned out. It was a nice break to get away from the Halloween and the Christmas and move on to those fun spring colors, especially the little conversation heart colors of Valentine's Day. Thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with me today. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you like this video. You can also subscribe. Follow me on Instagram at Sandy Cogdill Designs or on my blog, sandycogdilldesigns.com. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a fantastic new year. Bye-bye.